kind enough to get up my, he's at the place that I consider to be the most idyllic place this country has to offer. Carmel, California, it is home. He is the varsity basketball coach of the girls team of Carmel High. I don't know what his winning percentage is. He's done well, though, in the book department. His newest book is Rory. He is Alan Shipnuck. My friend, good morning. I like the appearance. You are Darth Vader. How you feeling?
Well, I became a sports writer so I could sleep in. This is a measure of my esteem for you, Gary, that I got out of bed for this.
Well, thank you. I've read so many of your books, and they all teach me something. I always learn something, and generally, I find that the subjects seem to be more endearing to me. We'll get to that with you in a little bit, but I want to start with why now. This is somebody he's got breath, you would think, left in the productive lives of what compelled you to write about him, and that is the game of golf. Why choose to do it now with Rory?
There's a chance this will be the last golf biography ever written. I say that a little hyperbolically, but all the old timers have been done, the Nicklaus, the Palmers, the Hogans. There's a new Tiger book every year. Obviously, Phil Mickelson has been retired as a subject, but when you think about the generation behind Rory, I'm not sure who can carry a book. And I've been tracking Rory his whole career. I mean, not to spoil anything, but the book begins. We're on a private jet flying across China years ago. And I think, 4 years ago, Rory was probably universally beloved. I think he's become more polarizing into his 30s, especially with the arrival of Live Golf. And as I was working on my last book, Live and Let Die, Rory just became a bigger and bigger figure in my mind. And I started working on this in the spring of 2024. I had a hunch that something big was going to happen in his career. Even I could not have come up with a scenario like the final round of last year's Masters, but I always feel like it's better to bring a book out a little too soon than a little too late. And it worked out perfectly because, in my mind, the Masters kind of drops the curtain on the second act of Rory's career. And it's fun to look back, and it's kind of tantalizing to look forward. So it turned out to be the perfect time, but it did take a little luck.
Alan, prodigies, I think, share some things. And one of them, most importantly, is this innate ability to do whatever it is that they do. He was one, and there are others in the sport that you cover that are. Does he have commonalities with the aforementioned Tiger and Phil? And what was he in possession of early of that maybe they weren't?
Well, I think it's obsession is the difference, because no one is born knowing how to hit a golf ball. You might be given certain tools from your parents and hand-eye coordination and your musculature and things like that. And Rory came from an athletic family. Everyone knows his dad and is a good golfer, but actually, Jerry's brother held the course record at Hollywood Golf Club there outside of Belfast. And on Rory's mom's side, there's some terrific athletes. An uncle was a very good Gaelic football player and things like that. So certainly he was given some tools, but it just came down to he just was obsessed with the game from the first time he saw it sitting in a pram, as they call it over there, watching his dad hit golf balls, and he just wanted to do it, and he never stopped. And it's the same story of the young Tiger Woods, the same story of the young Phil Mickelson. They just chased it harder than anybody as kids, and they developed the skill set, and then they had the success, and that pushed them forward. But the difference between Rory and those two characters is that he's remained a whole person, in the words of Nick Faldo. He comes from this famously working class background, and Rory's just carried with him this gratitude for the life he's leading, and he's just kept his feet on the ground in a way that neither could. And it's really incredible that you look at Tiger and Phil, and their lives have been sidetracked by addiction and by scandal and by controversy. And Rory's had a little bit of controversy along the way, just enough to make him interesting for a biographer and a reader. But in the final analysis, he's been able to remain a relatively normal person. And that's probably the hardest thing of all, with the superstardom and the fame and the wealth. And so that's really the defining difference between him and the players he looked up to, is is they lost their way, and Rory's just kind of kept going as this kid from Hollywood and Northern Ireland, and that's part of what makes him so admirable and probably easy to root for.
You know, Alan, you mentioned, you know, the idea of being normal and normalcy. And I certainly agree with you. You know, in the interludes that I've had with him from the first one, I thought that he had an uncommon trait among people who are in a position of entitlement, which was he was a good listener, which I think is an unselfish trait if you choose to genuinely listen to other people. But you use a term in your book that I think he's been challenged by, but somehow, some way he's managed to get back to this word, centered. Kind of take people through some of the chapters in his life that have challenged his ability to be centered. And what do you think has been able to get him back to that place, which is so important to him, which is where he's most comfortable?
Yeah, he really used that word in the context of his relationship with Caroline Wozniacki. And, you know, they met, they were both 21, 22. They were number one in the world, her in tennis, of course. And, you know, Rory thought that was the secret, is you find one of the rare people on the planet who could relate to your situation. And, you know, their pillow talk made sense. It was about about achieving your dreams and managing all the challenges of being number one. And there's very few people who could relate to Rory at that age. But what he found was he lost that center of who he was and what made him happy. And he was going from her tournaments to his tournaments to corporate outings, never getting home, never connecting with his roots, never being in the real world. He was always in these bubbles of privilege. That was when he started playing the worst golf of his life. And of course, as soon as he ended that engagement, a couple of days later, he comes back from 7 shots on Sunday. He wins the BMW PGA, you know, the flagship event of the European Tour. Goes on an all-time historic run and that really launches his career. And so there was very much a straight line with him going back to a simpler life and finding that center and playing some of his best golf. So Rory likes the finer things in life. He has the mansions, the jets, the watches. But deep down, I think what makes him happiest is being with his friends from home, being with his parents, and just kind of staying in touch with the person he used to be before the stardom. And so, and he said when he met his current wife, Erica, you know, she was working for the PGA of America as kind of a bureaucrat. She lived in a little condo and he was attracted to the normalcy. And so I think he's always trying to maintain the sense of who he was. And it's sort of fundamental to how he handles stardom.
You use the word impetuousness, that has been kind of a defining characteristic, whether it be golf course, whether it be romance, whether it be business. And I also would add this, and again, I'm guilty of this, you know, petulance in moments of righteousness that can be looked upon as being righteous or petulant or both. And that means like evolving opinions from how he felt about the Olympics from the outset. And you talk about that, and I think that people who don't understand why he felt the way that he felt until he got into this pragmatic space of why he made the choice to eventually participate, but to his feelings about LIV, to his feelings about the Ryder Cup, evolving points of view, and it's not necessarily changing opinion, it's maybe a better informed opinion, a more well-rounded opinion. Is that part of all of this impetuousness, and maybe an element of being petulant as well?
One of the things that's appealing about Rory is he speaks his mind. And we went through decades of Tiger Woods press conferences that were just word salads in which he said nothing. And so it's refreshing that Rory has an opinion about everything.
Yes.
And he's happy to share it. And it's articulate and it's often passionate and he speaks from the heart. Now, sometimes he does change his mind and walk things back, and he'll get criticized for that, you know, as a flip-flopper. You know, that was a big put down in an old presidential campaign, you know, that in modern life, especially in modern political life, you're not allowed to change your mind. Like you have to express an opinion and defend it to the death.
Yeah.
Or you're showing weakness. And, you know, Rory will take in new information. He'll think about it and he'll say, you know what, I was wrong, or you know what, I've changed my mind. And to me, that's admirable. Like that shows an open mind. It shows a certain intelligence, a certain intellectual flexibility. Like I think those are good traits. But these days, when you do it, it's it's held against you. And so I give Rory credit that there's been many times where he has not dug in and refused to acknowledge the reality. He said, "Yeah, I was wrong." I think that it would be a much more pleasant society if all of us showed that willingness to admit that, and it takes a little humility. So I give him a lot of credit, even though there's folks on golf Twitter who will hold that against him. But I think it's a winning trait.
You mentioned there are a few moments in the book when you talk about things that were not, huge, but you're pointing out certain aspects of certain seasons. I happen to be at the Grand Slam of Golf in 2011, 2012, 13, and 14. And of course, through those 4 years, he's a participant there. And I remember asking him in 2014 in October of that year, do you think you're as truthful as you were 3 years ago? And he said, probably not. And I actually thought that was truthful. But Alan, my point is, I actually think he's gone from whatever governor that he might have had when he was trying to figure out whether it was brand or whether it's worth it, to now, I think, like to your point, there's an unvarnished element to him that has value that some people may disagree, but don't disagree that it doesn't have value. I think that he is no governor now. Would you share that?
Yes, and on and off the golf course. It goes back to your question, why write about Rory? Obviously, he's fun to watch play the game. There's a flair, there's a heroism to the way he plays, there's a recklessness, and it's compelling. But it's the way he's lived his life in general. And governor is a good word because, Rory talked about during this long fallow period where he didn't win a major championship, that there's this self-protection mechanism that he felt. And Bob Rotella, who I interviewed for the book, who's been Rory's sports psychologist since 2010, he said the price of greatness is you have to be willing to get ripped to shreds. That if you just kind of hang around and try to make the cut or try and eke out a top 10 finish, you're not going to get your heart broken in the same way as if you're trying to win and you're trying to make history. And I think there was a period there where Rory backed off a little bit because it hurt too much and he didn't want to suffer that pain. And he recognized that. And part of what finally got him the green jacket is that he just became willing to go through that. And he was willing to suffer to achieve his dreams. And you also see that in the press room where he's just willing to say what needs to be said, and he knows it'll take some arrows for it, but he's unbothered. And that was obviously quite evident during the sort of battle for the soul of golf between Liv and the PGA Tour, where Rory emerged in many people's mind as a spokesman for the entire sport. And he took a lot of shrapnel. There's no doubt he probably lost a few fans, but in his mind, he had to say what needed to be said, and it was worth it.
I do not think, and very few are, I do not think he's predatorial, but one of the things that you point out in the book, particularly kind of the latter stages when he goes on the flyer in 2014, and why I think he's so well built for the Ryder Cup, I think he has empathy embedded in him. But if you poke him, he's not afraid to bully up. And I thought he did that at Valhalla. You point out the episode where he thought that Ricky and Phil were being too chummy, and he needed that. He needed to witness that. And he talks about, and he is, quoted in your book talking about, look, being that way is not something I'm inclined to be. But if there are ways for you, and I think Bryson did that to him. I think it served him well to have friction in that environment at Augusta National. Do you think the bully is something that has to be pulled out of him?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. There's different kinds of competitors. There's some guys who want to win, and there's some who want to beat you, and it's a different personality trait. Obviously, Tiger wanted to beat you. He wanted to humiliate you. Like he wanted to rip your heart out, to use Tita Woods's phrasing. I think Rory just kind of wanted to win, but he didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings early in his career. And he's talked about that. And he said, I almost thought it was it was a bad thing to beat a guy on the last green because you make him feel bad. And it's an admirable trait as a human, but it hurts you as a competitor. And he had to grow into this sort of alpha role where you could still show class and sportsmanship, but it was okay to stomp on a guy's dreams. And I think there's been periods where maybe Rory's lost that a little bit. But as you said, something about Bryson definitely activates that, which is a good thing. It's part of what makes a rivalry fun. There is a little tension. There is a little edge. You need that. Tiger versus Phil had that. Tiger versus VJ had that. Those rivalries are fun. And I think that's part of the balancing act that Rory is always, he kind of wants to be everything to everyone sometimes, but on the golf course, it's okay to be ruthless. And I think when he remembers that, that's when he plays some of his best golf. So hopefully Bryson or someone else will poke the bear and we'll see that side of Rory because it's fun to watch.
It is. I don't think this will be a season on the brink type of dynamic between Feinstein and Bobby Knight. But your relationship with him, you mentioned, look, you've had ample personal time. I'll never forget when he couldn't wait to find you at Glen Eagles in the postscript of the 2014 Ryder Cup. That to me, that to me exemplifies somebody valuing somebody's opinion, not just merely dismissing it. If there's anything in this book, and he's a curious lot, as you know, I don't know how he's not going to not want to read this. Do you think there's anything that will particularly irk him?
Well, Rory's had two big, blow-ups in his business life, and those are well documented. And he's probably not going to be thrilled about that. Of course, there's the breakup with Wozniacki, and he's probably wishes that would just go away, but it's so germane to his playing career, as we talked about. And of course, there's the marital drama where, he files for divorce from Erica. It becomes very public. Some old rumors that spill into the mainstream press. They reconcile. I mean, that has to be told because it played out so publicly. And in fact, it was a subtext to the entire Ryder Cup where, Rory everyone knows that the fan behavior crossed the line, and a lot of things were written about the fans at Bethpage, but it was sort of in code, and it was not, there were personal attacks. But for whatever reason, I didn't see anywhere, and I read extensively where people actually wrote about what was said and what happened. And a lot of the abuse toward Rory was about his marriage, was about Erica. And so you have to understand that context of why was Rory, flipping off the crowd? Why was he so fiery? It wasn't because people are yelling, hey, Rory, you suck. That happens at a Ryder Cup. It was much different. And so, but I think, again, this all played out in such public arenas. As a biographer, it would have been a dereliction of duty for me not to write about it. So, of course, he probably wishes that wouldn't be in the book, but I can't edit these things out of his life. They happened. And to write a clear-eyed, honest biography, you have to put everything in it, the good and the bad. In Rory's case, he does not have Phil Mickelson's demons. There's not the earthquakes in this book is that one. And I'm sure some fans might be disappointed about that, but the fact is it's been more of a life well lived for Rory. So I think it's a feel-good portrait. I think that ultimately he will appreciate that. And I will tell you, there's some spicy stuff in the first chapter that gets into this confrontation that Rory and I had at Oakmont.
Oh, yes.
And it's very spicy. So I wrote about all that. At Pebble Beach, when they were playing in my backyard, I gave Sean O'Flaherty a couple copies of the book. He's Rory's, career-long manager, basically. And that afternoon, Rory came into the press room and he thanked me very publicly in front of the press corps and the tournament officials. And I felt like that was kind of a public peace offering after what happened at Oakmont. But then Sunday night, when I was walking to my car after I'd filed my story, and the place was cleared out, it was dark and drizzly, and Rory and his caddy Harry Diamond were walking toward the tap room to get some food and drink, and we bumped into each other. And I made a joke of all the people you're going to run to on a dark, rainy night in Pebble Beach, it had to be me. And he laughed, and He said, I read the first chapter. It was good. It made me laugh. And so if he wasn't bothered by what was in that chapter, I think Rory and I are in a good place. But in the final analysis, I didn't really care. Like, I didn't write the book for him. I mean, I write it for the fans. Like, that's the relationship that means the most to me. And, people appreciate the Mickelson biography because it presented him in full. And I celebrated the philanthropy and the random acts of kindness. But I was also, very honest about his flaws and his vices and his addictions. And I leave it up to the reader to decide what they think. And so, Rory is not my target audience. It's the fan at home who follows golf and wants to feel closer to it and wants to understand what makes this guy tick and this journey he's been on. But I'm pleased that he likes it. But again, I care more about what the everyday fan thinks.
Well, that's me, and it is very good, as always, not surprising. Look, life ain't a clean sheet. He's not any less endearing or appealing to me than he was before I opened the book, because there's a lot of great stuff in here. Thank you for getting up early. I look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, Gary, thanks for having me.
You bet. Alan Shipnuck again. The new book, Rory, just that.